Okay, well, I feel the introduction makes me feel like I'm some kind of an expert or something. I'm not, and I'm not an expert on actually on any of the stuff that I'm talking about. I wouldn't say, and I'm especially not an expert on some of the nuts and bolts of what registering seed or breeding or any of that. But I am here on behalf of the National Farmers Union, so like I say, a National Farmers Union perspective, and our analysis from the National Farmers Union on some of the changes that are going on within seed laws, within seed policy, within Canada. We only have a short time, and a lot of this is tough stuff to explain and to understand, so I'll do my best. I'm hoping to do a little bit about what is Bill C-18, what is UPOV 91, the correlation between UPOV 91 and Bill C-18, and a little bit of a look at the Seeds Act and variety registration, the changes there, what are the alternatives, and what can you do, what can I do, what can we all do. So it's just Bill C-18. It's to me, it's been like top of mind since it was introduced in December 9th, 2013, so almost a year ago. It brings in changes to several agricultural laws, including the Plant Breeders' Rights Act, and from the National Farmers Union perspective, this is something we've been working on, looking ahead to for many years. So when it sort of came, it was became a top priority for the organization. So especially the changes around the Plant Breeders' Rights Act. So, but Bill C-18 is an omnibus bill, which means that it changes a whole lot. 9 different agricultural laws they're not even all related to each other, that are changed under this one bill, which makes it really hard as farmers to try and get a grasp of what this could mean for us down the road. So we've really focused within the National Farmers Union, we've put most of our focus on the changes to the Plant Breeders' Rights Act, and I'll touch on the changes, on one of the changes to the Seeds Act. The bill, the Ag Committee has been before the Ag Committee. I know as of yesterday, the Ag Committee has put together their report on Bill C-18, so it will presumably be going back into the House for third reading. We don't know the timeline. The government decides when things get brought forward. But I know that the Agricultural Minister Jerry Ritz told the Canadian Seed Trade Association a year ago that he was going to have Canada under UPOV 91 by August 2014. So I imagine that since he hasn't managed to do that, there will be a push to try and get this finished up. So one of the big things, the changes, the amendments to the Plant Breeders' Rights Act would bring Canada under UPOV 91. So we'll get back to that. So just because I'm going to be talking about plant breeders' rights, just what are plant breeders' rights? They're a form of intellectual property that allow plant breeders to claim exclusive rights over varieties that are new, distinct, uniform, stable, and have a unique name. And a plant breeder can be an individual or it can be a corporation. And it's a choice on the plant breeder to register under the plant breeder's rights. It's not mandatory. It's a choice that you made to as a plant breeder to give yourself those exclusive rights and to be able to charge royalties and such. So. What is a new variety? And I'm not sure what all this, the difference, what that will mean on the ground. But pre-Bill C-18, a variety is considered new if it has characteristics that distinguish it from pre-existing varieties. Under Bill C-18, a variety is considered new if its propagating or harvested material, the seed, has not been sold by the breeder in Canada. So exactly why that change, we haven't sort of pulled out why that and looked at it really closely, but it is a change for whether or not it's distinguishable to whether or not it's been sold. It's, and I just want to, because sometimes this gets confusing, what's the difference between plant breeders' rights and patents? Both are a form of intellectual property rights. They're both a way for both PBR holders and patent holders can restrict access and or charge royalties for the use of their property, so they can say who can use their property, and they can charge royalties. A patent is granted for an invention. Plant breeders' rights apply to new varieties of plants. So in Canada, which, and sometimes it's different in different places, but in Canada, plants can't be patented. So you can't patent a plant. You can put a plant variety, PBR protection on a new variety, but plants can't be patented, but gene sequences can be patented. So a gene sequence, that's how genetically modified crops are how they get patent protection, because the protection is on the gene sequence, not on the plant as a whole, but on the gene sequence. So in Canada, patents apply for 20 years. Under Bill C-18, under UPOV 91, plant breeders' rights would apply for 20 years for seed, 25 years for trees and vines. And right now, the PBR protection on seeds, I think, is 18 years. So when the protected period ends, then presumably varieties or patents, inventions that were patented enter the public domain. So what is UPOV 91? We throw around the term because it's easier to say. UPOV is actually the French, works better for French, but in English it's the International Union for the Protection of or the Ownership of New Varieties of Plants. So but disparily, the UPOV genie is actually there. So the NFU, the National Farmers Union Youth, pulled that out and used it in one of their in their PowerPoints a year ago. So apparently this is actually they actually copied it from UPOV. So here's the UPOV genie. But, UPOV was established in 1961 and then revised in 1978 and 1991. So that's why we talk about UPOV 91, we talk about UPOV 78, because those are the times when it was revived. Canada's first Plant Breeders' Rights Act was brought in 1990, and it conforms to the 1970 UPOV 78 rules. Bill C-18 would bring Canada under the 1991 version. And by coming under the 1991 version, it would extend plant breeders' rights, would be extended to reproduction, selling, exporting, importing, stocking, and conditioning of seed. So stocking of seed is storing seed. For conditioning of seed is cleaning seed. So currently under our current Plant Breeders' Rights Act, plant breeders' rights holders have the exclusive right to sell and reproduce seed in Canada reproduce in Canada for the purpose of selling. So it only covers the first part, the sort of reproduction and the selling of seed. So this extends the PBR protection to more areas. It also introduces the potential for endpoint royalties, and that's what the government is saying. Well, it doesn't necessarily bring in endpoint royalties. It doesn't, but it enables endpoint royalties to be introduced and used in Canada. So right now, you can only charge under 78. PBR holders can only charge royalties on the sale of seed. So, and when you sell seed, then and you may charge a royalty to help sort of cover your costs of breeding or developing a new variety. And by allowing endpoint royalties, royalties can be charged on the whole crop instead of just on the seed. So it gives you more options as to when you can collect royalty payments. You can So those are a couple of the changes that come in with UPOV 91. UPOV 91, I think we've called it a template sort of law, where you can sort of just copy the template of what is laid out, and we very much see that's what's laid out in Bill C-18 under the PBR Act changes is sort of copying what UPOV has laid out and copying it into our own law. So I do want to address farmers' privilege, because if anyone's been paying attention to the debate around C18, this is a big area of interest. Farmers' privilege, that UPOV, moving to UPOV 91 and in Bill C18, that this farmers' privilege will enshrine the right for farmers to save seed. Well, last time I checked, a privilege is something you're given, and it can be taken away if you don't behave or something. So it's a privilege. It's not quite the same as what we as farmers have looked at as our customary practice of being able to save seed for eons. So there has been some. One of the amendments that the Ag Committee's recommending is to sort of change some of the language around the farmer's privilege within the Act of Bill C18. And changing the language doesn't change the fact that we've still got this farmer's privilege, and under UPOV 91 guidance documents, it's actually called the optional exception. So it's something you can choose to put in or not. And the part that, so there's talk about changing the language around the farmer's privilege and what's laid out in Section 5 of the Plant Breeders' Rights Act. But what the other thing that doesn't get talked about very much is that in Section 50, the governor and council, which is the cabinet, has the power to pass regulations around that sort of box in the farmer's privilege. So they can pass regulations that would remove classes of farmers, would remove plant varieties, would remove crop kinds from the farmer's privilege, and to restrict or prohibit or put conditions on the use of harvested material. So we grant the farmer's privilege in Section 5, and then in Section 50, way down, we give the cabinet the power to sort of put restrictions around what that farmer's privilege would be. And we took a look, and I took a look at the explanatory notes for UPOV 91 around this optional exception or the farmer's privilege. And this is some of what's laid out in the UPOV 91 guidance documents. The exception is aimed at those crops where there was or is a common practice of saving harvested material for further propagation. So right now in Canada, it's very common for farmers to save in the general. I mean, organic farmers are somewhat different, and I'm talking more about field crop farmers here, but it's very common for farmers to save seed, their own farm saved seed, for small grain crops, wheat, oats, barley. It used to be, I come from southwestern Ontario, it used to be a lot more common for farmers to save seed for soybeans. That doesn't happen much anymore, partly because of, one, some people are growing genetically modified soybeans, so patents mean they can't save soybean seed. Other farmers that are growing non-GMO soybeans are often signing contracts where they will purchase seed. So it has become not a common practice now for farmers to save soybean seed in Ontario. So this would say that since it's not a common practice, the exception shouldn't be allowed. So there you go, let's remove crop kinds from the farmer's privilege, soybeans. And then it says, I thought, of interest, me as a vegetable grower, it may be considered inappropriate to introduce the optional exception for fruit, ornamentals, or vegetables. So that's what they say specifically in the UPOV guidance documents. They also, as situations change, as the evolution of farming practices, economic development, a member of the union could limit the level of farm saved seeds to those levels that had been common practice before the introduction of plant variety protection. So I kind of looked at that and I thought, here we've got the Bauta Seed Initiative and all kinds of other organizations going out there trying to increase the amount of farm saved seed. And if they were to increase that, this farmer's privilege could actually say, no, you can't do that. We have to keep those levels to what has been common practice before the introduction of UPOV 91 in Canada. And in laying out the exceptions or the farmer's privilege regulations, the UPOV guidance documents are pretty clear that the countries when adopting a farmer's privilege option need to ensure that the optimal benefits from plant variety protection or plant breeders' rights are obtained. So, so it's not that it's sort of where's the emphasis is to protect the interest of the plant breeders. So what about heritage varieties and seed savers? And so plant breeders' rights do not apply to private non-commercial growers, gardeners. They do not apply to the experimental use of seed. They do not apply to older commercial varieties that are in the public domain. I mean, this is, you can only put plant breeders' rights protection on new varieties. You can't, and generally they do not apply to heritage or heirloom varieties since they are not new. And trying to figure out what, and we sort of put that generally in because actually in the questions and answers on Bill C-18 on the CFIA website, it says heirloom varieties tend to be freely available in the public domain and in most cases would not be eligible for protection. So that's CFIA itself saying in most cases heirloom and heritage varieties would not be eligible for protection. So I don't know what, you know, I don't have good examples on what those cases might be, but it still, to me, is generally, and there's still a, you know, a little loophole that may be there that I think, so, and this is, you know, under UPOV 91, a plant breeder can apply for rights to a new variety by discovering and developing it. And so that kind of leaves questions. Developing's not defined. What does that mean if someone goes out and discovers something someplace that's been growing and no one's ever put protection on it and they work on it for a little bit? Is there an option there that they could? I don't know, but it's sometimes, you know, these questions are, and I think, you know, sometimes when I talk about, you know, Bill C-18, it's like there's lots of questions and what would happen if somebody took something to court and what would be the, we don't know. The other thing that I think is important sort of to, and then we haven't talked a lot about this in the NFU in our work on Bill C-18, but the other piece is what comes in around essentially derived, and under Bill C-18, breeders retain control over a variety that is deemed to be essentially derived from a protected variety. So, I mean, what is, this is out of the Act, what is essentially derived? Something is essentially derived if it's predominantly derived from an initial variety, if it's clearly distinguishable from the initial variety, but at the same time conforms to the initial variety in the expression of essential characteristics that result from that genotype or from that essentially derived. So, I mean, what this means, from my understanding, is that if a farmer purchased a PBR-protected variety, grew it on their own farm, and selected and saved their own seeds for several years, the farmer's variety would likely be considered essentially derived, even though they've grown it out, it's adapted to their own, and would remain under the protection of the original plant breeder. So, so I think, you know, that's the kind of thing we as seed savers do, and as farmers who save seed, that's the kind of thing that we do. And this is, you know, would we lose control, you know, so it never becomes, it remains protected. And the Organic Trade Association spoke at the Ag Committee hearings on Bill C-18, and this is one of the issues that they brought up as a real concern that they found for organic farmers. So that's a little bit of a quick run through on a few things out of Bill C-18 and the plant breeders' rights part. I just wanted to touch sort of quickly on some of the changes that have been going on, are going on around for the variety registration process, because we've got all kinds of things that go on at one time and it's hard to keep up. So amendments came into force on June 4th of this year that amend the seed regulations that moved oilseed radishes and forages from Part 1 to Part 3 of the variety registration system. And what that means is under Part 1, independent third-party testing for performance or agronomic quality is required. There's recommending committees that look at the merit and I would say are there to protect the interest of farmers. So this generally doesn't apply to vegetables, but it does apply to a lot of the field crops. So most of the small grains are still in Part 1, but by moving to Part 3, all that's required to register a new variety is that the registrant just has to submit an application to register a new variety. There's no consideration of whether or not this is a benefit to farmers and whether or not this is a variety that's going to benefit them. And the other change that came in with those changes is that CFIA is required, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, required to cancel registrations of any variety at the request of the seed company, which means that they may not ever get around to entering the public domain. So one of the changes that I wanted to sort of bring up about that happens in the Seeds Act and several other acts under Bill C-18, so I was just going back to Bill C-18 a minute, is what's called the allow incorporation by reference, which would mean that instead of something going through a regulatory change, you could reference a document in the regulation, and that document could be changed someplace else, which would in effect change the regulation, but without any kind of consultation. So the CSTA, Canadian Seed Trade Association, they've been sort of pointing out that they would like to have Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 of the variety registration incorporated by reference so that things could move from Part 1 to Part 3 without a full consultation, because that takes time. It takes time to go out and ask us what we think and then ignore it, but it takes time. So it would make the change much quicker. So I'm not going to go into this, but the other thing that Bill C-18 allows in the Seeds Act and several other acts is to accept foreign reviews in making regulatory decisions. So why should the changes in Bill C-18 matter to us? And you know, I think a lot of these changes have to do with, I'm a vegetable grower, a lot of these changes have to do with field crops and with grain crops. I think a lot of the changes have to do about getting more control of wheat seed that farmers are saving on their seed. But why should it matter? And so, you know, I have to think, I'm a vegetable grower, small vegetable grower, why does it matter to me? And I think that I think that, you know, it's a whole series of things that take power away from farmers as a whole. So I'm always willing to stand with other farmers. But I think it's also a way, along with this, we've seen a pull of support for public breeding and public research. And so this is a way to justify that pulling of public research. And I feel there's more likelihood that public research and public breeding and that kind of support is going to help me than private breeders who are focused on the crops that can make them a lot of money. So that's the other thing is we like to pull out this quote. Terry Boehm is the former president of the National Farmers Union and really the expert on a lot of this. Those who control the seed control the food system, and those who control the food system control people. Do we want to entrust Monsanto and their like to this power? So other alternatives. And I'm just about out of time here. So, and I think one of the alternatives that we've put out as the National Farmers Union is we put together the fundamental principles of a Farmers Seed Act. So, I'll give you the link, and that's available on our website. But that's one of our alternatives, and you can read through it. I put a few of the points up here, but I won't give you time to read them all through, and I'm not going to read them all through. But that's one of the alternatives. And then, you know, what can you do? Some of these are laws, and so we like to, you know, we can always push our government representatives. We have a campaign that we're doing. But what can you do? You can grow some of your own food. You can save your own seeds. You can buy your seeds from companies which offer seeds from small local growers and plant breeders who support open source seeds. And you can join and support organizations committed to keeping control of seeds in our hands. The National Farmers Union, the Open Source Seed Initiative that you're going to hear about, Seeds of Diversity Canada, I don't know how, I forget how they eco-sign. And just I'll just leave you with this, because a lot of this information and our whole laid out fundamental principles of a Farmer's Seed Act are on our website.